meeting of the February 17th special meeting of the NIP to order. Alyssa, is there something we need to read about video meetings?
Yeah, I think Tom has that.
There is, I do. Welcome to the February 17th, 2022 meeting of the Monterey Neighborhood and Community Development Program, NCIP. We encourage members of the public to join our meeting via Zoom Gov, which is a secure service for use by government agencies. Joining on Zoom is preferred because there is no lag time when you are connected to the meeting. However, this meeting is also streamed live on youtube.com/City of Monterey with a delay of approximately 10 seconds, and also on Comcast Channel 25 with a delay of up to 90 seconds. If you plan to make a public comment, please join the meeting using Zoom Gov on the app or by telephone, making sure you join in time to accommodate any delay. To join the meeting from Zoom on your computer or phone, use the link or phone number on the agenda at isearchmonterey.org. And since this meeting has already begun, you'll find the agenda under the Recent tab. To join by telephone, dial 833-568-8864. That's a toll-free number. And then enter the meeting ID, which is 160-862-4676, and then the pound sign. That's also on the agenda for tonight. And if prompted to enter a participant ID, just press the pound symbol. Additional information is available at the top of tonight's agenda, and detailed instructions on using Zoom are also available at monterey.org/public meetings. Make a public comment, please raise your hand using Zoom. Or
Could we have Harry silence his mic because you're getting kind of overrun here by, there it goes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
To make a public comment, please raise your hand using Zoom, or if you are connected by telephone, dial *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute yourself. Public commenters will be muted until it is their turn to speak. We ask that all public commenters turn off TV or computer speakers or go to another room while connected by phone, as any background noise will interfere with the broadcast. Each speaker will be called on in the order that their hands were raised. The chair has designated a 3-minute time limit for tonight's meeting. The countdown timer is shown on the screen. If you are connected live on Zoom, the timer is accurate with no delay. Please stay within your time so that you won't have to be cut off. And thank you. We look forward to receiving your public comments.
Okay, and Alyssa, before we take roll, Kurt, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Just as an FYI, I tried to get into this meeting using the meeting ID supplied in the email, and it's not the panelist ID. The only way I could get in was to click on the link. So just an FYI.
Okay, thank you, Kurt. Alyssa, you want to go ahead and take a roll?
Yeah. Okay. Aguajito Oaks. Alta Mesa.
Here.
Casanova Oak Knoll.
Here.
Deer Flats.
Here.
Del Monte Beach.
Here.
Del Monte Grove, Laguna Grande.
Here.
Downtown.
Here.
Fish Flats. Glenwood. I think I saw Lee.
Here.
Monterey Vista.
Here.
New Monterey.
Here.
Oak Grove.
Here.
Old Town. Skyline. Oh, wait. I skipped Old Town, but April, I see you there. Old Town. Oh.
Here.
Skyline. Skyline. Okay, Villa Del Monte.
Here.
Okie doke.
I take it we have a quorum?
Yes, we do.
Okay. The first item on the agenda is public comments. This is time set aside for any member of the public to address the NCIP on any matter that is within the purview of NCIP, but is not on tonight's agenda. I do see one hand raised for public, Mayor Roberson. You have
Good
3
evening.
minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes. All right.
No, you have as much time as you need.
And who's the time czar, huh? Is it Vladimir? Hey, everybody. I always I try to attend as many of these meetings, and I always start with complete sincerity and appreciation for all that you do to make this very complex committee work. I don't think, unless you've been with it from the beginning, when I first introduced this, put it on the ballot, when Richard and I had that aha moment and realized that our neighborhoods needed attention and special money. And from that day forward, this committee has done extraordinary work. So I just wanted to tell you, I get it, I understand. Now, I don't know if it's an agenda item later, but I certainly want to thank our staff, your chair and vice chair, Rick and Jean, for meeting with me, Hans, Chrissy, and Steve Wittry, just to talk about the process. I hear your frustration, and I hear that it's just a difficult process going forward. You probably you heard one thing one meeting, and then you heard something else another meeting. I understand that. And so whenever I'm in a pickle, I always blame, and that's not pickleball, by the way. Whenever I'm in a pickle, I look and say, it's the pandemic. So you've weathered through a lot. In fact, if you go back a little bit in history, went through the grand jury report, we had all of those recommendations and changes in the FPPC, state mandates. Trust me, I understand state mandates. We get those all the time and often don't make any sense. So I'm simply saying thank you. I get it. You have an opportunity to look at old and new projects with new eyes. And I want to compliment our staff. They're going to do absolutely the best that they can to have things go forward. So I'm counting on all of you to do that. And I do see a couple people whom I recommended to the city council and actually see them in person. Harry, I don't know if we've met in person or not, but hi, I see you. And I think everybody else I've actually seen in person somewhere or another and out and about. So again, big appreciation. Thank you for persevering. This pandemic has really thrown a monkey wrench in everything. I'm full of tired cliches. And then going forward, when I read about we're in the worst drought in 1,200 years, then I see another wildfire in the Sierras. And these things, and sea level rise is accelerating. And I know my friend Kurt's going, yes, it is. And so there are a lot of challenges going forward, and your committee might be able to help with some of those as you look at projects. So a big thank you. I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate you. And I'm just going to sit around and listen from now on. Have a great meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not seeing any other member of the public with the hand raised. Alyssa, do you know of anyone wanting to speak?
Nope, that was the only hand raised.
Okay, and seeing none, we'll close public comment and move to the first agenda item, which is approval of the minutes from January 13th. Does anyone have any additions or changes to the minutes? Seeing no one rushing forward to do anything, I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Second.
I move we pass the minutes.
Moved by Mr. Rosello,
I'll
seconded
second.
by Mr. Whipple. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in, we have to take a roll call though.
Okay, Aguajiro, excuse me, Alta Mesa,
Yes.
Casanova Oak Knoll,
Yes.
Deer Flats,
Yes.
Del Monte Beach,
Yes.
Del Monte Grove, Laguna Grande,
Yes.
okay, downtown,
Yes.
Glenwood. Glenwood? Did we lose Lee?
Lee, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm having trouble. I'm here.
Are you voting yes or no on the minutes?
Yes, sorry about that. I'm befuzzled
okay.
because I couldn't get into the meeting tonight and I had a problem. So yes,
Monterey Vista,
Yes.
New Monterey,
Yes.
Oak Grove,
yes,
Old Town,
Yes.
and Villa Del Monte.
Yes.
Rick.
Okay, the minutes are approved. We'll move on to the first public appearance item. Is to receive a report from the chair and vice chair on the February 2nd meeting with the mayor, city manager, city attorney, and public works director. At our last meeting, we, on a motion, you all asked us to reach out and set a meeting with the mayor and the others I had indicated a minute ago to discuss how to handle previously approved and now defunded projects. Staff, or Mr. Witry had indicated our prior meeting, a new process we would have to be following. As a committee, we had issues with that process and so asked to have the meeting. We met on the 3rd of February. The city attorney, Christy Davi, laid out her reasoning for having to go to that point. She's here, can expand or make sure I reflect correctly on what was all said. Basically, where we are is as follows. If you recall it's two main elements to it. One is the view is once they were defunded, they were no longer projects. So would have to go through a process again. We were saying, why could they not just be put through and approved and we start approved funding for them? The main reason for not having that be a possibility is, if you recall, last year was the first year where we had last time we voted was the first time we had the new voting process with the paddles. Which was mandated to us by the FTPC. So the reality is we cannot look at now that they were defunded and are no longer projects. In effect, the voting process we did when they were put through is not the current voting process and is not a acceptable or potentially legal voting process. So they would have to go through a vote again. Some of the projects also had base allocation on them, which also went away. We discussed a lot of different elements to it. Also, one of the issues raised is if we don't have those projects go through the process like others, anyone who was not around at that time could argue they've been disenfranchised and not had the ability to comment on the project. So it is the legal determination of the city attorney that they need to go through a process to be reapproved like we do other projects. The one difference being they are already gone through the screening process, so they would not necessarily have to go through that screening process again. They would automatically be submitted and be a project to be considered. So it would mean we would be voting on all and having hearings on and all the discussions on all those previously funded projects unless the neighborhood determined one of them wasn't feasible or there was major opposition to one of them. then it could be potentially removed from the list based off of that information. So at the end of the day, we really had two options. Option one is they're new projects, they have to go through the process. Option two is we petition the city council to ignore the city attorney's ruling and say to go ahead and do either a bifurcated process or something with those projects. We made clear, first of all, that as the two of us, Gina and I, we couldn't tell them which way we would recommend. That's up to you as a committee to make a decision on how to proceed. Also, but it was very clear that the council would be given very strong legal advice to not deviate and view any of those as previously approved. The same thing happened to all CIP projects at the council level that were defunded. They would have to start over with anything. We raised all kinds of things about some of these have already had money spent on them, a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, it really came down to a very, very definitive view of how it needed to proceed, unless we wish to try to convince the city council to do otherwise. Gene, do you have anything you want to add, or did I miss anything? You're muted too.
Thank you. You gave a good summary, Rick. The suggestions were from the mayor to look on the positive side that we had $4 million already coming in for TOT, not this last allocation, but the projection for the next funding year is already up to around 4 million, and that's great news. His advice was to try to look on the positive and to, if we needed to, blame it on COVID, which is coming in handy for many things. We do have the option to take it to the council. And it was reaffirmed to us, and Chrissy, I'm so glad you're here because we're going to need more counsel, I believe, that we can, at voting time, prioritize in the manner that we want. And my follow-up question, Chrissy, if I understand that direction correctly, would this be something that we each individually decide, or can we discuss this in public? I know we can't discuss it in private because of daisy chaining, but can we discuss it in a public forum like right now, how we might prioritize, or can we not?
Before we actually go to Christy, that's my understanding is a bit different. We have a voting process where we put our paddles up. That number of points determines the priority process. Now, at that meeting, we can lobby folks in open session and say, I'm going to support all the pre-existing ones with 10s, and I'm not planning on giving any points to anyone else. And others may choose to do as they see fit because it's open session and we're making our points of what we're supporting and not supporting. But it's the priorities based on how many points they get.
And as I recall, now we've only done the panels once, and it was
correct
close to 3 years ago.
Yeah.
As I recall, we could or could not make a comment after we had raised our paddle on that project. Is that an accurate memory or not?
My memory is we argued we said our views at the beginning. Then we started voting. And once we started voting, we went straight through and voted on every single project.
Okay.
There wasn't or making comments each one.
Are we allowed to
Every
make clear
project
that
is equal in its ability to be voted on?
Are we allowed to make clear that this was a previously funded project or not? Are we allowed to make that distinct?
My understanding is they will be so identified in the process, what was previously funded. But realizing it is not, because it's previously funded does not mean, yeah, it's now a submitted project that had been previously funded. Is discussion. And Christy, if I get off base, please correct me.
No, you're summarizing it really well. Thank you.
You're welcome. Jamie.
So let me put a spin on it. I think what I'm hearing is not that there's a concern about the lack of public input or people not wanting to take input on these projects. I think probably the concern is that we had a pile of projects that we wanted to get done, and they were beyond any single year's funding. So I would like to ask a different question. Assuming we have put them all through the same review and approval and voting process, what's to stop us from going ahead and putting the pile back together and voting for $8-9 million worth of projects? That puts everything back in the pile, it's ready to go, and it doesn't get in the way of any of the public input or hearing or the processes that we're missing, and it doesn't go against the voting that's required, but it does let everybody get back to that maintenance position. Is because really what people don't want to lose a good project, and that has to do with funding. It doesn't have to do with voting.
The challenge is none of these projects have viewed as having any voting previously done on them because they're all brand new projects.
Yeah, so I guess I'm saying, we haven't decided how much to vote for. If we decided to put the first year's list at $10 million, we could sit there with cards and just keep going. What's to stop that?
I guess if I'm understanding, you're saying instead of having them come in as individual projects, they come in as tranches of projects or all one project.
No, I'm saying usually what happens is the reason revoting is so stressful is because you may make the cut or you may not. And we clearly have way more projects than can make the cut on the current year's funding. If you take that stress away by making the cut really big, then you eliminate the stress of having to revote. So you approve more projects than you can do in 1 year. You approve all the projects. You do it like a giant catch-up vote. Each project one at a time, but suddenly you've restored your inventory.
It would then mean, so in effect, we're not, right now we vote on every project. And we start from top to bottom in points. And when money runs out, that's where the cutoff is. So kind of what you're saying is we have one vote this year and we don't have any votes or program for 2 years. And the money starts going automatically into that to fund everything that's on the list, including new projects submitted this year, because they would be on that list too.
Yeah, the committee could decide to do that, or the committee could say, I'm going to rebuild it. I got $10 million worth. And each year I'm going to put a few more on. We haven't decided that, but they can be voted on and they can go through hearings. And then people don't lose their work.
Let's take other comments, and then at some point I think we will need to hear Christie's view of that. But yes, Kurt, or no, excuse me, Dave Overton had his hand up before Kurt.
Thanks, Rick. Just hearing the options, it just doesn't seem the right path to recommend we go against the city attorney. It just puts a little bit of a blemish on what we're trying to do. And I think, my experience of being on this committee for, I think, maybe 10 years or so now, people aren't bashful. I think we're able to speak up as we go through the review process, the normal review process. And then, like we talked about on voting night, making comments up front. I think there's worth to revisiting those previously approved or previously recommended projects that were removed and advocating for those. And maybe, in light of today's situation, maybe not elevating those ones that were on the list, but, for whatever reason, we feel aren't really that important anymore. And I like Jamie's idea of somehow keeping those going forward, whether we can actually get them to funding or not and approved by council. But I think it's within our capacity as I think just based on the history of, as we talked about last time, those ones we worked hard for and, got over the line, but then, because of COVID, these now, got erased. But I think that corporate memory is still here with a lot of us. And I don't know, I just think it's within our capacity to revalidate those ones that we feel are important and move on beyond those ones that maybe aren't, and mix it in with things we know we need to do every year like the fuel abatement and things like that. So anyway, just my thoughts on this.
Thank you, Dave. Kurt.
Okay, so just to follow along, I believe you said we are going to accept new projects, correct?
We have to.
That's what I thought. So if we start trying to fund all of the projects that were defunded, those projects will stay for the next 4 or 5 years because of the funding that we have available. Are we going to be allowed to keep those for 4 or 5 years before we can fund all of them? That's the question.
Well, I guess they could be resubmitted every year, like any other project could. And I think one of the things we could do a motion for is at voting night, when we're at that point after having voted, is to indicate the committee's desire to automatically have the previously done ones roll over in the next year to automatically be submitted. I would see that would be within our power to ask to have happen. So
Okay.
that we've done that with other kinds of projects before who've automatically gone back up.
Yeah, we need to set the expectations to the public that
Yeah.
it's going to take 4 or 5 years to refund all of these projects, because we don't get that much money every year, and we're going to have new projects that obviously are safety issues or something else, or deforestation, that are going to take part of the money away.
It'll take 4 to 5 years, even if we didn't have new projects.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
So, yes. Anyone else have any comments or Hans?
Yeah, I think if we get a chance, if we label the previously funded projects clearly and, with a PF, red PF or something on it, I think a lot of us will have enough memory that I think without kind of going against Chrissy's wishes, I think we can probably vote fairly securely and get a lot of those projects prioritized over new projects, just because people have a good memory, and we won't need to bring quite as many of our residents back in to plead for their projects.
Thank you, Hans. Steve?
Thanks. Yeah, one of the things as staff member here, I think that you have some great ideas, and I think what makes some sense, and I'm just going to propose a thought process out there on voting night. What might make sense is to identify when the project was either first submitted or first approved. That way, it's clear to the public and clear to everybody in the audience who might be watching that this was either submitted for the first time in 2022. You may recall that we have some projects that were submitted actually prior to COVID that were submitted in 19. It might be helpful to just identify XY project submitted in 2019, and then we have a vote on it, or XY project previously approved in this year, and then have a vote on that project, just to provide clarity to the NCIP members as well as the public as to the standing of that particular project before the vote. I think that's something that just might help give that extra effort of clarity. Just a thought process.
I think it's a good idea, Steve, and we might want to also have indicated how much has already been spent on that project. because some of these have had funds already expended. Richard, are you trying to put your hand up?
Yes.
The
Yes.
old-fashioned way?
And I don't have a button that says raise hand. Not on the iPad. It is frustrating to be explained the rules every year, obey every rule, and then to see a lot of work have to be done over. It's like building a house and be told to tear it down. We got to do it differently. But I'm beyond that now. And I have some questions I've had since our July meeting. And one, we have 180 some odd defunded projects. Let's say we have 50 new ones. We're talking well over 200 projects. And with the exodus of engineers from the city, I really, if we're going through this effort, can we build them? Can we complete projects? And I've heard hopes and dreams, but I've never heard yet we have people that are experienced and they can do the job on day one. I need to know that. And in addition, we have brought up many times, we got this list of 180 pre-approved projects. We asked for a list of what are the top 10 from each year of that 10 years. I'd like to know what the priorities are. If something came in at 47 and got the lowest points of the voting night, I'm going to look at it differently than something that came out number 1 or number 2 on that year. So I never did get that list. I would like to get the list of just the top 10 from each year that we're talking about that are defunded projects. I will say I did go over the Kona projects, and one just kind of jumped out at me. It was a project that dealt with the flooding on Fremont on even light rain coming from my neighborhood. And we ended up with a project that put dry wells in. There was $180,000, but we lost a $350,000 grant due to the pandemic. But that project only will do 5% of the flooding that we have. So we don't see that as a good investment, and we're going to withdraw that project. I hope every neighborhood goes back and looks at those projects, talks to Tom, gets the actual figures on cost and benefit, and whether it actually does what it was intended to do, and we'll put more money into the pot. And I'm more than happy to have another neighborhood get a top priority if we have a project that really doesn't do what we wanted it to do. That's all.
Thank you, Richard. Jean, and then April.
I would appreciate legal counsel's opinion about the hesitancy we all have to advertise for new projects. And are we liable for, at a minimum, criticism for not affirmatively going out into the community to get projects like I think historically we have, when there's such a backlog and when there's been all this confusion about how to prioritize. I'm feeling very conflicted. The cutoff date is March 4th, and I feel some obligation, and yet the last thing I want are more projects that can't be done and frustrated citizens that can't get their projects done. So I would like to know that it's okay to not beat the bushes for new projects and not even mention it to the community.
Christy, can you allay her question?
Sure, I'll try. I might need to pull up the approved manual to see what that directs, and we should follow whatever the manual proposes. But if it is a concern, I'll just suggest to the committee that you don't have to approve and put forward 200 low cost projects. You could do 3 or 4 more expensive projects. I mean, so that's what the council's direction from 2019 was, that the NCIP committee use 0 to 10 voting paddles. And so all of these projects, the defunded ones and newly proposed ones, should be coming to the table all on equal ground as a clean slate. So those are all going to be considered new. Some of them may have a history and some of them may not, but they should all be considered fresh, anew, as if they've never been approved before. And then the committees to use 0 to 10 voting paddles, and you're to submit to the city council for approval the top scored projects within budget, plus 4 cutoff projects. That's the city council's direction from 2019. And if you'll remember, the process is one in which we handle all the conflict area projects first. And so that somewhat dictates the order of the voting anyway. So you have to handle all the conflict voting projects first, and then the rest. And so they will be ranked, and then the top ranked ones within budget will be forwarded to the city council. And in your decision making on how to rank, you might want to factor in workloads and time for getting projects done. And is it the policy of the committee or you as a voter right now to have maybe fewer projects go forward that are more costly, as opposed to a long list of multiple projects that may or may not get done over? I mean, they will eventually get done, right? Unless they're funded, and hopefully we don't have another pandemic hit us where it wipes out the budget. So once they are approved and funded by the city council, they remain funded and they will be completed at some point. And I know staff works really hard to get those done. Does that address the question?
Well, that's a good review of the voting procedure, and I think we did need that review. My question is, am I going to receive criticism from my community members if I don't put out on Nextdoor or on our email list or in our newspaper, our news report, that the deadline is March 4th? I have a whole lot of trepidation about bringing in new projects, and yet I feel a liability. So I need counsel on that.
Let me try to pull up the manual just to make sure I'm not misremembering which version.
Christy, you're breaking up and I'm not sure what happened to your audio.
Can you hear me?
There's
No?
a lot of static. There's a lot of static.
Okay, hold on one second. Maybe I should exit out and come back in. Hold on one second. Let me.
So
Other
Gina,
people
so Gina,
feeling
if I
the
could just.
same conflict? Yeah,
So
go ahead,
Gene,
Steve.
perhaps that in the next item, one of the things that the NCIP committee will do is look at the actual schedule. And there is nothing that ties the end of the schedule to the fiscal year as was thought in previous years. So if the committee as a whole thinks that would like more time to garner more interest in new projects, that March 3rd cutoff date simply could be moved. It's just a draft schedule. Everything else falls behind that, of course, but that schedule cutoff date of the proposed is a draft that can be adjusted by the NCIP. So it's completely under the control of when that cutoff is by the team, by the group.
I think the question isn't so much when the cutoff is, if I'm interpreting Gene right, it's how much work do we really have to do to solicit new projects? And if we don't do what we've done in the past as individual committee members, are we in any jeopardy of any type? Is that kind of it, Jane?
That's it.
So in looking at the manual, there's no obligation on the part of any member to advertise or to go around and solicit projects. There's no obligation to do that. Really, the city puts forth the date and the deadlines, and the city advertises that. to some extent, and the projects are nominated to the city. It seems the committee's work really begins at the project nomination phase, where the manual does say that the representatives are required to determine to what extent projects have support in their neighborhood. So that's really where the work as a committee member picks up. So if you don't advertise a nominating period or closing date, that's not a problem.
So I'm hearing there's no obligation to solicit. And another reassuring way to put it is, Steve once reminded me, we can submit projects all year long. So there's no real race to the deadline. I mean, we could explain it to the community. It's always been you could submit a project at any time. We don't, I mean, I'm just trying to get ready for the criticism of why hasn't there,
We're
Ben.
going to get a criticism no matter what,
we're
because
gonna get
we'll
so
take
much-
the blame for the fact that the previously approved ones are no longer approved.
Yeah.
And it's,
But thank you, Chrissy, for that opinion that we have no legal obligation to solicit, because I'm feeling overwhelmed with the number of projects that are backlogged, with the amount of work it's going to put on the engineering staff, and the history of not completing projects timely anyway. So it's kind of like, why solicit new projects?
Yep.
Thank you.
okay, thank you, Jane. April, and then Hans, and then Dave.
I have the same feelings you have, Jean. How do you explain to your neighborhood it's so hard to include evidence that their project is worthy and then explain to them, well, I'm very sorry, but it's gone bye-bye. And is there any way for each of us to individually explain to our neighborhoods why this happened? I think we're probably going to come up with many different versions. Is there some way something could be typed up that neighborhoods that said, here is the sequence of what happened. First this happened, then this happened. What happened with the committees that decided we could no longer do it. I think that would be helpful. At least we all would be explaining things on the same page. Right now, we're going to have, how many of us are there? Many different versions of what it is. And then I still, inside of me feel very badly for the people. I have to tell them, I'm sorry, your project no longer exists, or it's no longer funded. How do you say that and do it kindly? It's not going to be taken kindly. So I would appreciate any help on this, maybe a printout of information. If this is legally what we have to do, I think we all have to present it to our neighborhoods on the same page, or we're going to all be, somebody may say, well, April said this, and then somebody's going to say, well, Jamie's neighborhood said this. I mean, we can go all over the board and have 500 different stories. So I think that would be much appreciated.
Okay. Thank you, April. Hans, and then Dave, and then Christy.
Yeah, I would say that we make the cutoff date fairly soon, or even we probably can't make it in the past, but fairly soon. But basically, if we can automatically resubmit all approved projects, and probably including the projects we approved in 2020 that never went to the city, but the ones that we by vote approved, and can automatically resubmit those and go from there. Start the review process and go from there, because that would streamline it, at least for this year, and move things forward.
Thank you, Hans. Dave?
Yeah, I think Christy raised her hand because of the questions that Jean and April brought up. And I think it's very simple. It was COVID. And that's actually, what April was asking for is actually available on the city's website. I mean, it's pretty well explained. the conversation I've been having with my neighborhood here, and of course, my neighborhood is not that, significant amount of projects being submitted in, Deer Flats every year. But my conversation with the board and to the community has been, just the reality of, the budget because of COVID and, what had to be done to just meet payroll and things like that. So I think people understand that. I don't think people are going to point at us and lay blame on us for what happened. But I think, that story is pretty well explained, on the website. And so my community is more or less aboard with not submitting a lot of projects and trying to fund those ones that we prioritize that were, there in previous years. So anyway, just thoughts on that.
Thank you, Dave. Christy, and then Dennis.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Overton just basically summarized what I was going to say. COVID-19 caused the city to be in a position of a $30 million deficit that is significant, but unprecedented. So we had to just keep basic services afloat. The city council had to make a very difficult decision. No one enjoyed having to make that decision to defund the projects that had previously been approved by the NCIP committee. And the NCIP projects weren't alone, by the way. There was, $1.5 million, I believe, was also defunded from the capital improvement project fund. And we also laid off 80 plus employees. So it was across the board. There was no targeting or ill will or any desire to eliminate these projects. This was a radical step that needed to be taken to keep the city operating and to keep police and fire services going and basic bare operations during this pandemic. And it just so happens that when something is defunded, it is no longer approved. That's just sort of how municipal finances operate. So that's really the explanation in a nutshell. And really, Mr. Overton summarized that very articulately. So I'm sort of just repeating it here. But anyway, that was going to be my statement.
Dennis, and then Kurt.
Sorry, I came in a little bit late. I was stuck in traffic in Portland getting into Camas, Washington, where I am landed now in the hotel room. If we could get that link sent out to everybody that links to the details about why the funds were cut, and does that actually include the details relative to the layoffs and the capital accounts that were cut as well?
I don't know.
I believe it was all done in the same budget meeting. I'd have to go back and double check, but I think it was all in the same meeting. We could link up something to that.
Yeah, because if we have a common language that we're speaking from to our communities, that way we don't have a Brown Act violation of not saying the same message, etc. So I think that'd be wise to do a common language for us to speak to this issue. That's all.
Thank you, Dennis. And I see Kurt put his hand down. So we've got an attendee with a hand up. Any other panelists? Oh, Kurt, you have your hand back up again?
Sorry about that.
And then we'll go to the general public. We have a member of the public who wants to speak to this.
Okay. So just to be clear, we had our neighborhood meeting this January, the annual, and I was asked when new projects would be allowed to come back in. So I know from the downtown area, we are going to get a new project. It's a safety project. But I think the public still needs the right to hear that we are accepting new projects. And then the other thing is, when we voted with the paddles, my recollection was we voted for all of the projects that we had approved for submittal. Is that right?
We voted on every single project, which gave every project a point value, which then ranked them basically, highest points to lowest points. And
Right,
money started at the top and worked its way down until it was gone.
So are we getting set up to have to vote for 200 projects?
Yes.
I thought so.
Basically, every project that's there gets voted on.
Okay, that's what I thought.
But we don't have a debate before each one or public testimony before each one. That's all done up front, and then we start first project and vote all the way through. But yes, we vote on every single one.
It'll be a long night.
It could very well be. In the public, John Sovereign has his hand up. Alyssa, do you want to unmute him or so he can speak? And then Robert, oh no, okay, just John Sovereign.
Good evening. My sympathy to all of you for having to deal with this. I'd just like to follow up as someone who's submitted a project in the past. I hope that the city would reach out to each of us and let us know what's happened. You know, it's not enough just to say, oh, it's on the website. My recollection is that when I submitted a project, the form included my name, address, and phone number. I would like the city to let me know what's happened. And I'm also willing to volunteer to stuff the envelopes necessary to make that happen. But I think the city owes us that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sovereign. And do we have any other member of the attendees or the public? I'm gonna take a opportunity to just make a couple of comments based off of what I've heard. I'm not hearing an appetite to go in front of the city council and try to get them to overrule the city attorney. And I'm hearing that there are a few things we'd like to have done. One is a definitive verbiage put together for all of us to have basically what occurred. And so we're all speaking to the same page, explaining of why they are no longer a project and have to go through the process again. I also think Mr. Sovereign brought up a very, very good point. I think the city owes it to all the people whose projects were there to make contact, whether it's a letter out to them or something, explaining the process, that it's going to be put back through the process, that they have an opportunity to speak to it, and all the rest. I know as neighborhoods, we're probably going to be doing that with all the ones in our neighborhood, but to have a formal process, the city is the one that city council defunded these and created this scenario because of the COVID and all the rest. But I think it's incumbent on the city to reach out to all the people who submitted projects that were defunded and let them know what the happening, what the process is moving forward. I think Richard had raised a question about the ability of engineers to be able to even build and or bid or determine costs for all these. I'd like to have Steve address that at some point here before we move on to the next agenda item. But I think, I think we move forward with our next agenda item. I think we've, unless there's someone, because I don't see this being agendized to take a position on sending it to the council, unfortunately. But I didn't hear a lot of people urging that be happening. So
You have a raised hand from the public. Robert.
Robert, yes, go ahead. If you could please unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm one of those people from the public that's going to have to resubmit my project proposal. It involves our park. We have a very old chain link fence which kids can climb, and we need to replace it with one of the more modern vertical slat fences so kids don't get run over if they get out of the park when their parents aren't watching. I don't know if I can totally prepare my whole project again by March 4th, and I just found out about this.
You won't need to. All of those previously approved projects will automatically be resubmitted.
I've been listening and that wasn't really clear to me.
Okay.
If you do that, but part of my proposal was I had everyone on my street facing the park or nearby sign a petition, and we all supported it. We had 100% support on my street to please replace the old chain link fence with something more modern and safer. Do I need to go and recanvass all my neighbors, or can their signatures on the petition still stand?
Let me put it this way, that petition, I would imagine, would be part of the things that would be forwarded as part of the project as it's resubmitted. Now, if you have new neighbors or people who live there, it may make sense to have them chime in because there will be public comment opportunity regarding it. But my understanding is, based off of what the city attorney indicated as well, everything that was submitted as a project before that had been funded and defunded is resubmitted. So to me, that includes petitions that were a part of it and all the documentation related.
Thank you so much. I wasn't clear because there's been a lot of conversation going back and forth.
No.
Okay, thank you so much. You answered my question.
Yeah, that said, it's still going through the public process and you're going to have to get voted on. So
yeah,
advocating it and all the rest is unfortunately going to have to happen. So.
That's okay. Blame it on COVID.
Okay, thank you. William.
Yeah, just a procedural opinion or suggestion. It seems to me that since we have a position taken by the city attorney that is our current operational situation, that absent some sort of affirmative motion from a member of the committee to challenge that we just that we should be done talking about it, that we should just go on to the next thing.
I would agree. We've got two more folks with hands raised, and barring someone making a motion after those two, unless someone else chimes in, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Lee.
I was going to suggest.
You muted yourself, Lee.
Sorry about that. I can do better on my iPad. I was going to suggestion I would make the proposal that we do not go to city council to take that kind of an action, that we do go ahead of what we're doing, moving the projects forward, because we're beating this thing to death right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jean.
No.
You're muted.
Glad somebody else has the problem too.
I just have to be unmuted. Following up with Mr. Yoha's comment, very good comments. We have made it clear that the previously approved and funded and defunded projects are going back into the till. We haven't, I don't think, clarified the projects that had been submitted the last year into a binder that never went forward. And what I did is I just recopied them and sent them in an email to staff just to have some kind of documentation that we're resubmitting those. So I'm just sharing that with the committee that I affirmatively did that. So those never went through the entire process, but they went through a whole lot of work by the residents and by staff. So that's what I did.
Thank you, Jean. Steve?
Thank you. Just a couple quick comments to hopefully answer some questions and help with some clarity. I think it's actually a really good idea for us to follow up with those folks for the addresses that they submitted, to let them know the status of the defunded projects, along with a standardized letter that indicates where the process is and what's going on with that, to give them the opportunity. And so they don't have to research that on their own, a form letter, if you will, that identifies your project was submitted and was defunded because of these reasons. Here's a new calendar that hopefully we can move on to and vote, so that they understand the new meeting schedule for those projects, and how they can be submitted and how they can be part of the public process. That seems very reasonable and seems a responsible thing to do. So I'm as staff, totally in favor of that action. Just a couple of different numbers for you. You're very correct. It is going to be about at least 200 projects. We had actually 120 projects that were defunded, not 180 projects, or 120 projects that were defunded. We had approximately 70 projects that were submitted and not acted on. Those are the projects that Gene was talking about that are submitted in the binder. And we have a few projects that have been submitted in the interim, because as we pointed out in the process, or as we pointed out in the process, there really is no start point to submit projects. There's a cutoff when we stop the collection of them. So there are a few other, I'm going to say a dozen or so other projects that have already been submitted. So in that aspect, we are looking at about 200 or so projects once we get through the actual screening, which will happen later on in the process from that. If I can just talk briefly about staffing, it's a volatile time with staffing. Just this Monday, I lost another key member. Didn't have to be an engineer, but it was a higher senior person in the public works staffing. The situation for employees is an employee market right now, and I can't guarantee that that I'm going to have a lot of staffing going forward. I can let you know that I'm working with the city manager and the human resources department and ultimately the council to modify and expand our ability to deliver projects by the creation of a program manager position within the public works department that may not be an actual engineer, but someone who can work with consulting engineers to move projects forward in a more in an equally effective process. So that's something that was suggested a few years ago, but something that I've done in other organizations. And I think, in all honesty, right now with the shortage of licensed engineers, I think that may be the direction that we have to go to assist with getting some of these projects actually delivered when they're going through the process. I wish I could promise you that we're going to get 100% of the projects delivered. I can't promise you how many engineers are going to have next month, frankly. We will do our best. We always do our best. And I will hold myself accountable and hold our staff accountable. I think that one of the things that I've also laid forward in previous meetings that we're going to do is provide schedules for the projects for completion. It's a two-edged sword, right? So people understand when a project is going to come forward and when a project is scheduled for completion. Some projects will take short time. Some projects, unfortunately, just take a long time to accomplish. So we'll put ballpark schedules those projects once we have the approved list, once we get past voting night. So I just wanted to put that out for you. Those are the discussions we've had here at staff and some clarifications from the comments tonight. And any other questions, please let me know.
Okay, Dennis will be the last speaker, then we'll move on to the next agenda item. I do want to, Steve, is the plan for the projects that were submitted last cycle, which we voted on, but didn't actually go through approval by the council, will all those be resubmitted as well?
So there were projects that were created in a binder. Every project that has been submitted and has either not gone through a process or was defunded by that will be pushed forward on the list. And all those projects, the submitters will be contacted via mail.
Okay.
We'll send them a letter to let them know the process of where it actually stands.
Okay, thank you. Dennis and Tom, I said I was going to end it after it, so we'll do Dennis, but then make it quick so we can move on. Dennis?
Just operationally, I know in the law drop project, I did probably 4 or 5 different things of funding. If the unapproved project or the defunded project is going to come back with a big number, can I ask for it in pieces, or is it going to have to stand on its own? Because it's too big a lump when a small budget of 4 or 5 million is what we're likely to get to ask for a $1 million project back. So I think it needs to be broken up in parcels like I had done it originally to get it funded.
I would say anyone who has a project like that needs to work with Steve to figure out the best way to have it be coming in.
Copy.
I would agree with that. Thank you, Chair.
Tom, very quickly, please. We need to move on. And you're muted.
I was listening at 6:18 and finally got logged on about 6:18, but I was listening before that. So I joined the meeting somewhere in item 2. That's all I could say. Thanks.
Okay. All right. We will move on to item 3. There's no action required in item 2. It was receiving a report, and we had good, lively discussion about it. So item 3 is adopting the NCIP committee deadline and meeting schedule for the development of the 22-23 NCIP program. Tom, do you want to give a quick report, or how do you want to proceed on this?
Yes, I can. Everyone should have a copy of the proposed schedule in their agenda packet. And what we had done is just taken the information that we had developed for 2020, the year that we were cut off, and just followed the schedule for that. Last month, we had everything, like the first item on the agenda, or on the line number 1, is the orientation meeting, which was the meeting that was on January 13th last month. And the next item was the project application submittal deadline. This would be for the nominated project. Last month we were.
Can you put this up on, do you have this to put up on your screen just so people can follow along?
Yeah.
In case they can't get access to the one online.
Let me do that right now. Can anyone see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Or at least I can. I don't know about anyone else.
We'll go with that. Thank you, Rick. The next item, last month we had the deadline for new nominated projects as February 4th. And since this schedule didn't get adopted last month or approved, we just pushed everything from there back a month. So the proposal here is to have the deadline for new projects be March 4th, which is the Friday. It's in a little more than 2 weeks from tonight. And then all the other meetings follow a similar schedule as far as time in between to what we had proposed in 2020 before the program was cut off or paused. So we have, just running through, we have screening beginning mid-March. The first round of projects begins in April on the 21st. In May, we've got the second half of the neighborhood project. So April and May would be reviewing the projects. There'd be public comment meeting toward the end of May. And then the project selection meeting is scheduled right now. It's proposed for June 16th, which is a Thursday night. So that would be the voting night. So we have between the 4th, we would have basically all of March, April, and May, and then half of June till we get to selection night. And then from there, it would be going to council, the planning commission, parks and rec, and all the other boards and commissions. This schedule has the city council receiving it in, well, the second meeting, it looks like in September to approve it.
Okay. Tom, you have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that the projects that we inputted for the year when the cycle got killed, that those projects don't have to be resubmitted. The one I'm specifically thinking about is the radar speed signs on Jocelyn Canyon Road. That was even had a proposed location. There was quite a bit of work done, and I hate to have to go back through that. So are we being assured?
They are being submitted based off of the comment made by Mr. Witry in our last item. Those items are being submitted.
Thank you.
Jamie.
A quick point here. In the past, what we've done is one meeting to say, is this allowed in NIP? Then we've done 1 to 2 meetings to have the committee be informed of the facts and situations of the projects. Then we've done 2 meetings to have public input. What I'm seeing here is those 2 meetings for public input are on the schedule for May 19 and June 2nd, but they're both labeled as second public comment. So that would be a change from historic, which could be fine, but I want to be clear that we're inviting the public to come twice. And not just at those public comment meetings that are usually at the end after the facts have been set up. I don't know if you could see the detail that I'm looking at. It says second public comment, but there was no first public comment noted before May 19.
Yeah, we always technically have public comment on any of the items, even in those earlier ones, but I see your point of calling it second. I don't know why we need to say second, just say public comment.
Because the reason we usually kind of try to get the first fact-finding one done pretty quick, and then we give the public lots of time in those public comment meetings.
Yep. Any
You
other
will correct that. That looks like a typo. We'll fix.
And my understanding is the meeting on March 17th, the preliminary screening, we would only be looking at projects that were not the previously approved projects to determine. And that would also be when any neighborhood would bring up any projects within their area that from the previously approved ones that are no longer feasible or no longer wanted. Is that correct, Steve?
Yeah, that'd be any project that has not gone through a screening process. Projects that have gone through a screening process will bypass that night.
Okay.
It would be much appreciated, though, like you mentioned, if projects that are no longer of value to the proponent were actually struck from that night, and then it does make some sense. If it happens later on in the process, that's fine, but if it happens there, it would make some sense.
Okay. Jamie, do you have another question or just, okay, Dennis? You're muted.
Thank you. I got the big picture of the calendar up. Given that we have 200 projects that are coming at us from previously approved, now being returned to us to vote upon in this budget cycle, to the extent that we can review those.
Actually, it's 120, not 200.
It's 120 plus the 70 that didn't.
Plus the new, correct. So it's total, not 200.
Yeah, it's a total of 200. This is quite a volume of work. You know, if we NCIP members can go back to our community and determine that of those 200, a number of them fall away and shouldn't be reconsidered, that certainly will lighten the loads all the way around for meetings and engineering staff to rebudget, et cetera. Should we maybe put something like that on the calendar in front of us to decide which projects we're not going to carry forward? The second half of my thought is, to the extent that we're reviewing projects that have already been vetted once before, do we really need 2 nights of discussion and 2 nights of public testimony on those projects? I mean, can we truncate that a little bit to help us with the schedule? Because we have a lot of projects to consider.
My understanding is old projects and new projects need to be treated identically, according to the city attorney, because they need to have ample opportunity for new public comment, so no one can say. Now, on the 17th of March, on that screening, to me, that would be the ideal time to say, these are projects that are no longer wanted from the previous ones, and drop out at that point. So they're not, we don't have them for all the other meetings, but they could drop out at any point. But my understanding is same process for both, other than pre-screening, because all that is for, it's not a public hearing. It's are they legal projects and so forth.
Does the engineering staff do any significant work prior to that March 17th review?
Steve?
So basically, I mean, there's a screening that we have to form an opinion on it, but it's cursory review, I'll call it, in terms of looking at the projects and seeing and trying to understand what they are. I don't think that you can classify it as a lot of engineering works per se. It's a cursory review.
And to the extent of the 200 projects, you guys have already had a review. So that a review of that and culling of that really doesn't help prior to the 17th. Question mark.
It's just a matter of volume. It may help, it may not. It really, I mean, I can imagine there'd only be 4 or 5 projects that may actually be determined that there are no longer valid, and it may not be worth that effort, so to speak. And it may just be worth it just to kind of push them all through and see what happens. If there is a strong opinion that this project is not going to happen, I can think of a few off the top of my head, but I just don't want to name them, so I don't want to offend anybody in the public out there. But they just aren't feasible any longer. It would be nice, and perhaps as a process, just, you know, as we send out our letters to the individual people who had submitted those projects, you know, this is a thought process we're working through, is to put on notice that these projects are going through a process with the new schedule. Perhaps there's a checkbox or something that identifies that they're have received this and they're still approving or something like that. I'm spitballing here a little bit for that aspect of it. I think that the reality of it, though, is that we want to be keep the projects moving forward. If there's 200 projects that go past screening, so be it. We'll go through that process and do what we can do.
And to the extent that you're sending it to the original submitter, will the NCIP representative be getting a copy of that as well? So that we know whom in our neighborhoods or whom have submitted a project in our neighborhood, what those details are?
So I think what I envision in this mailing process would be a direct mail to the person who submitted it, and then a master list mailing of the projects that were to that within that NCIP representative's zone, that these were the projects that were mailed out to these people, like a checklist or a listing of that. Honestly, I didn't anticipate having multiple mailings to all members as we're going through this process. I think that a mailing that goes out to the individual submitter, a listing of the projects and people that were sent out to the neighborhood representative, a summary document so they're understanding what was mailed out to who, it seemed to meet the mark for trying to get that notification to the team.
But doesn't city staff put together a binder for each of the representative on what's actually it's the whole city? So never mind. Okay, got it.
Okay, Luz? Want to go ahead, Luz? You're muted.
All right, sorry.
Okay.
The deadline for new projects is March 4th. And then I hear 200 projects already. Did I hear that wrong? Do we have that many already to work on? 200?
About that number, yes.
We have 200 projects already?
We have all the ones that were defunded, plus the ones that were reviewed last cycle, but not formally acted on from the council. And there are some that have already been submitted, so it's about 200 projects.
So we are working with all of that.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Kurt?
Real quick, could the staff please publish those projects that we reviewed but didn't vote on? So we have that ahead of time.
I think it makes sense to put that online. We'll put a link to that on the website. It makes sense. Yes.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Jamie?
I want to remind folks that if we're going to put a binder together, all of the submitter information is included. So, and the years of the projects will be included too. So depending on when the total list of projects is gathered up, everybody will have that information without any other mailings. But what I actually wanted to say is we've had 200 project nights before. And without those included public comments with every round. So I think that with our new voting process, it'll go faster.
We will see. Anyone else have any comments? And I think this is actually a action item. So let me also go out at this point, not seeing any hands. Is there any member of the public who wishes to comment on the proposed schedule? And then we'll come back to you, Tom. Okay, I'm not hearing any member of the public. Tom, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just am hoping when they go back with the old project list that we don't get a one paragraph city summary which we had a lot of problems with, where a few years ago, we went and started submitting what the original submission was that people intended. So there's a fine tune between the summary generated by the city staff and what the original project person. And I think the original project person is what we want to see, at least, especially for the 70 that we didn't get a chance to vote on the last round. So that's just a quick comment.
Actually, we voted the last round. They just were approved by the council, if I remember right. So. Any other member of the committee, or if not, I'll entertain a motion for adopting the schedule.
I make the motion, we adopt this schedule as it is published.
Motion by Kurt Tipton. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
That's Jamie Fields. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Melissa, can you take roll call, please?
Okey doke. Aguajito Oak, oh, excuse me, Alta Mesa,
Yes.
Casanova Oak Knoll,
Yes.
Deer Flats,
Aye.
Del Monte Beach,
Yes.
Del Monte Grove Laguna Grande,
Yes.
Downtown,
Yes.
Fisherman Flats,
Yes.
Glenwood,
Yes.
Monterey Vista, Monterey Vista,
Yes, if Jean isn't here.
Yes.
Jean's having her mute problem, but she's here.
New Monterey,
Yes.
Oak Grove, Oak Grove,
Luz, you're muted.
Luce, Oak Grove,
I can come back to her at the end.
Old Town,
Yes.
Skyline,
Yes.
Villa Del Monte,
Yes.
and coming back to Oak Grove.
Yes.
Okie doke. All righty, Rick.
Okay, the schedule's adopted. Next item on the agenda is committee member comments. Please raise your hand if you just got a comment to make. Good, we're being nice and efficient. Oh, I spoke too soon. Jamie Field, Jamie?
I can be efficient. I just wanted to officially welcome Harry Nagel. You might have seen him. We have Del Monte Beach now has an alternate. We haven't had one of those in a long time. So it's always good to get new ideas and new blood. Thanks for doing it, Harry.
Jean?
I am concerned with the number of technical problems we had tonight and the number of people that were not let in as panelists. And I'd like staff to work on that so that the committee is allowed in without these 20-minute delays and the frustrations.
Okay.
Thank you.
Luz?
All these meetings coming on, are they gonna be through Zoom or in person?
I don't know that we know that for sure. It probably will ultimately be up to the council to decide when we're past the pandemic and up to start having meetings live, but I don't know.
Perhaps I can help. Rick, perhaps I can help with that a little bit, as we are the ability to have virtual meetings is relying upon the governor's statements of emergency for the pandemic. As that is being modified, we may not actually be able to have virtual meetings coming into the future. Obviously, it depends on as the pandemic moves forward. The city council, for example, looks like it may be moving towards, will be moving towards, unless there's some strange thing that happens between now and the next couple of weeks here, back to in-person meetings, and we would follow suit as the NCIP.
Okay. Tom?
Yes, real quick, Christine Cristobal happens to work in the same real estate office that I do. She lives in Deer Flats Park. She is the one that is getting the goat herders or the goats back. And she tried to call Tom Hardy. Her phone number, Christine Cristobal, is 238-1359. We missed getting coordinated the hard to get to sections between Deer Flats Park and Fisherman's Flats. Please get this done and get it so the bid can be submitted properly. So thank you very much. I look forward to having a real meeting and we get rid of these Zoom meetings. It took me 25 minutes to get logged on. It was way too complicated. I had to listen till I got logged on. So I agree with Gene Ross's comments. Why is it so difficult to log on these meetings? I log on to all kinds of Zoom meetings with not the problems I have getting onto the NIP. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Witry, I don't think you're a committee member, but
Oh, my hand was up by mistake.
Okay.
I apologize. I was responding back to the
William,
meeting. I
go ahead.
apologize.
I just wanted to say really briefly that I concur with the hope that we start meeting in person. Aside from the whatever technical issues that a lot of people are having, it just seems to me that the type of work we do is particularly ill-suited for meeting remotely. So I certainly am holding out hope that we can start getting together in person soon. That's all.
Thank you. Believe me, I would love to have it be in person. I'm not crazy about having to run a Zoom meeting with this number of committee members. Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is our next meeting, which will be on March 17th, which will be the preliminary screening meeting. And we won't know until a little while from now whether it'll be Zoom or in person. So I'm sure staff will let us know at that point. So seeing nothing else on the agenda, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks.